Welcome everyone to Zoom Palestine, to our special election, Israeli Election Day session, where we're going to discuss the implications of the Israeli election for Palestine, or are they any implications? Well, does it mean any changes or more of the same? So, and then we have a very interesting video about the visit of a young Palestinian-American woman who went to visit her father's hometown, which was Hebron, and how Israeli apartheid has wrecked that town and made her visit very difficult. And finally, we're going to see, and that's why we'll be going over time, an amazing interview with the author of a book who connects the dots between the cooperation between the Zionists and Nazis, which I had already read about, but this has lots more very important information. So we're going to begin with a few minutes of wonderful Palestinian music, as I'll share the screen with you, and where we will listen to some Tapka music, which should all cheer us up. Where did it go? Your screen sharing is paused. Okay, let's resume the share. I'm not sure why it paused. All right, let's do it again. Here it is. Okay. Hopefully you can see it. And let's listen to some great music. Palestinian culture, old folk dance, Zapka.
سابوا أرض الدار شيالوا بدك اشوف الصارع اللوز والتين وازور ارض الجليل ومية طبرية.
يا زارف الطول عنا الخبر شاع وقالب مجروح من ساعة يرتاح يا ترك يصبر على الدار نجاح ادعي ربي يكون يجمع شملنا.
I love this video because it shows so many wonderful images of the displaced villages of Palestine. Hi, welcome, Eugene. How are you? Good to see you. So now we're waiting for our election this week. And we saw the elections in Israel, which actually didn't surprise me. And to be honest, I'm happy about the results because it reveals what Israel has turned into. I've been saying for years from my visits there that Israel has turned into a far-right neo-fascist society, apartheid, and with vicious attitudes towards Arabs being propagated in the schools, with the far-right, religious far-right, super ultra Orthodox taking over. And so this is no surprise for me. And to be honest, I'm glad it happened because finally now America can see what unfortunately Israel has become. Now my Israeli friends are devastated and upset about the situation. But they know also that this has been going on, particularly with the influx of settlers, many of whom are from Brooklyn, and they're awful. They're crazy, they're losers in America who can make it here, and they got a very nice meal ticket, where they get free housing, free education, free everything, and good stipends if they move to Israel to cause trouble for the Arabs. So we have a situation on our hands this week, which on one way is awful, but on the other hand, it actually reveals what's been happening in Israel, what's been going on with Israel. So we're going to read the electronic intifada today and catch up on today's news, the latest news, and we see also that the Israel has been busy bombing Gaza again and causing problems in Gaza. And here's an article about Gaza cesspools, that one of the big problems in Gaza has been wastewaters, and here's an image of about 120,000 cubic meters of untreated wastewater flows into the Mediterranean Sea from Gaza. And yet new wastewater treatment plants are reducing pollution, but Israel bombed many of those plants in its recent bombings. The article starts out with a quote from a 23-year-old from Gaza who says, "We haven't felt at ease for 2 years. We can no longer enjoy meals or family gatherings, and life hasn't been the same since April 2021, when the new wastewater treatment plant opened about 100 meters from their family home, located east of central Gaza's Al-Bariji camp. Our neighborhood is infested with flies and mosquitoes," Abu Dahar, an accountant, said. "Furthermore, the foul odor does not leave the house." The Al-Bariji wastewater treatment plant was built to treat all of central Gaza's wastewater, a significant task given Gaza's sewage crisis. Currently, the plant absorbs around 60,000 cubic meters of sewage daily, and is one of the world's most densely populated areas. The Gaza Strip has 2.1 million living there in this tiny area who are in dire need of more sewage treatments. Currently, around 120,000 cubic meters of untreated wastewater from Gaza goes into the Mediterranean every day. And hopefully with the new treatment plants, this will decline. but the existing sewage network services only 60% of homes in the Gaza Strip, and the remaining 40% depend on septic tanks that often leak and seep into the aqua filter. But they keep building more plants. However, they can't catch up with the need. Gaza's population is exploding, and foreign countries like Germany have invested plants to handle sewage, but they can't keep up with it. And the smell is harmful, the health issues are harmful, and this is one of the problems that has happened due to the bombing by Israel that destroyed so many of the treatment plants. And other articles, I'll pull up my view a little bit to zoom in a little bit more. Other articles that they are talking about today are the British Parliament, British Palestinians condemned the sacking of student union president. And the same problem is going on in Britain as is going on in the United States with Palestinian students who try to do any kind of advocacy or even research or study of Palestine get in trouble. And the other thing, another article about that Israeli police are being used now as strategic partners for the EU. And then an article on the ultra-right coalition and the Kurds as Netanyahu makes its comeback. So we're going to look at this article about Netanyahu and what this means for Palestine, that the ultra-right coalition makes its comment. I was hoping that he wouldn't win, but to be honest, to me, and the American government finally is concerned. But to me, it finally is showing what Israel is about these days, who Israel is. I mean, Americans still have this naive idea of kibbutz liberals dancing in circles and in kind of a socialist mentality with democracy, freedom, and all of these other things that when people who believed in the state of Israel and accepted its legitimacy, one of the things that they all liked about Israel was leftist leaning and the kibbutz and the social network and all that. But all of that's gone. That's ended, and it's been over for a long time. For those of us who have been to Israel watchers, but Americans, and particularly the government, has been very naive. So let's read this article. With over 90% of the vote counted, it seems that Israel's fifth election is less than 4 years. In less than 4 years, will usher in the return of Benjamin Netanyahu at the helm of a religious ultra-right coalition. Netanyahu, head of the Likud party, looks set for a 5-seat majority. But while he may be the new prime minister, a notable comeback for the scandal-ridden veteran who's supposed to be in jail, still facing corruption charges. A man who's been making headlines is Itamar Ben-Gvir, a Jewish supremacist and head of the Otzma Yehudit Jewish Power Party. And actually I have a personal connection to this guy because a friend of mine, an ex-friend of mine, was the godson of Meir Kahane, who was the terrorist responsible for the assassination of Rabin and other horrible things, was the godfather of my ex-friend, who was a total hater of Arabs and denied there was such a thing as Palestine. So this group was very active in the United States with the Jewish Defense League, which went around beating up people who they thought were opponents of Israel. And they finally were declared terrorists by both the American government and the Israeli government. But here they are being elected to power and office. So the party is set the Religious Zionism Alliance, the big winner of the latest vote, is set to become Israel's third largest party grouping. And I was talking to a Jewish friend of mine last night I was having dinner with, and he didn't even know about this. And I said, look, Netanyahu's taken over. Before, he would have people in the coalition who were center parties, but now he has only the ultra-right. And he said, oh, they're not real Jews. So I'm wondering how many American Jews are still taking this seriously. I have to start talking to more people. The potential coalition of Netanyahu's Likud, Ben Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich of the Religious Zionists, as well as the Religious Shas Party and United Torah Judaism, suggests that the Israeli voters have bought in wholesale to the idea of permanent occupation and apartheid. The only left-wing Zionist party for which peace with the Palestinians was even an issue, Meretz, looks set to lose all of its seats. So that's what Israel's become. No surprise for me. Neither the Likud nor the Religious Zionist Alliance has any interest in giving up any land for a Palestinian state or allowing any kind of real sovereignty for Palestinians, let alone any semblance of equal rights. On the contrary, during the election campaign, Netanyahu vowed to annex all of Israel's settlements, that they would become part of Israel, considered a war crime under international law. You will find no objection from Ben Gvir and Smotrich, both settlers. If there was ever a time for the Palestinian Authority to walk away from the pointless Oslo project, this is it. Though past form would suggest that no one in the senior Palestinian Authority leadership has the necessary gumption to do so. The PA, becoming increasingly irrelevant, will only become more so. And my friend Fareed sent me a poem he just wrote for the Lion's Den. The Lion's Den, which is a new group of Palestinian resistance. It's not allied to it's not allied to any of the traditional Palestinian parties of resistance, Hamas, or the Palestinian Authority, or anybody, Hezbollah. These are young people fed up with the Palestinian Authority and unwilling to be limited by the religious fanaticism, the far-right religious fanaticism of Hamas and Hezbollah. And so they formed their own group called the Lion's Den, and they have been very active recently, particularly in Nablus. They welcome SARS, S-A-R-S, to we are going to see, I think, a lot of action. I think this Lion Den's group that Fareed wrote this beautiful poem in Arabic, and at the end, if we have time, I'll read you. I'll put his Facebook video on. You can hear his poem. It's quite beautiful. But this is a whole new chapter. So we have two new things that are happening. We have the total far-right government in Israel, and the rapid explosion, I don't even want to say expansion, explosion of this group, the Lion's Den, which is capturing the imagination and loyalty and commitment of many Palestinians, particularly the young. So for Palestinians on the ground, the election is likely to bring more tensions, but no real substantial change. And here I disagree with them. I think that the Lion's Den is going to become more active. After all, Israel was already freely expanding settlements, detaining and killing Palestinians while demolishing their homes under the previous anyone but not Netanyahu coalition. Well, that's true. So Israel is not going to be doing anything much different. But Palestine, these young protesters and resistors in Palestine are going to be very active. And then their activity will initiate military brutality, more military brutality on the part of the state of Israel, where instead of Gaza just being bombed, we may have Nablus and Ramallah and other places in the West Bank getting bombed too. So we can look possibly for all-out war on the West Bank along with Gaza. Nevertheless, the electoral triumph of Ben Gvir is a further embarrassment for the, quote, international community, that is, Western countries led by the US, that are the main sponsors of the Oslo Accords, will now have to justify their support for an Israeli government that unashamedly contradicts the U.S. and international policy. And I understand that the American ambassador in Israel has already sent out messages of alarm over possible the policies that Netanyahu and the far right plan to continue to implement and to expand. So we're going to be seeing more settlements. There's already over 1 million illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank. It's not just a couple hundred people we're dealing with, you know, crazies living in houses on hilltops. We're talking 1 million people now illegally living in the West Bank, and the plan is to just expand the settlement. It's like a cancer creeping over the state of Israel. So now what is the consequences of this behavior? What is it doing to these towns as the settlers expand? A very good example is the town of Hebron, which is where I was spent part of the summer. And my friend from the Hebron Hope Center actually sent me this video because it was about Hebron, and it described the consequences of the settlements for the towns and cities that are near them. So people often say, oh, well, these were hills where nobody lived on, which isn't true. They displaced, kicked off thousands of people, the entire Arab refugee camp, which is the largest refugee camp on the West Bank. Oh, Sarah, hi, it's you. Hi, Sarah. So that they kicked off the entire town and put them in this tiny refugee camp. I did a painting of it. I was so overwhelmed and saddened by the claustrophobic way people have to live in this camp, and poverty and with guns pointed at them all the time. It was just an awful thing to visit. And I photographed it. I used some photographs. But so, you know, these people, the settlements, illegal settlements that were put on the mountaintops, on hills, were not put in lands with no people in it. But a lot of people think, oh, it's just empty. It's okay. Let the settlers stay on the mountaintops. But what's happening is that these settlements are expanding and having profound impact on the land around them and on the city. And Hebron is a great example because it was a illegal settlement. Now, there's always been a Jewish presence in Hebron because it was a place where Christians, Jews, and Muslims celebrated Abraham because his tomb was there and his wife's tomb was there. So there was always a presence, and there was a tension. There were years when they got along, when the Arabs and Muslims and Jews got along, and years when they didn't. There was massacres committed by both sides. Most recently, the massacre of 24 people in the mosque, led by a guy from Brooklyn, a crazy settler from Brooklyn, a doctor actually, who went into a mosque while people were praying and shot 24 people dead. And my guide, who was there at the mosque when it happened, showed me the column, and with the bullet gaze that went by, that with the bullet hole, where the bullet that would have hit him hit the column and saved his life. So Hebron has a very complex history of both cooperation and hostility between Muslims and Jews. It has a very small Christian presence, so the Christians usually don't get involved in these issues, although their presence is also limited, and their lands, many of their lands have been confiscated from some of the churches there. However, the settlement that was a small Jewish community that was very ancient, now Israel is allowing it to expand. And it makes life hell for the Palestinians in Hebron. I was there, I experienced it. I could walk through a part of the city to get directly to downtown, while my Palestinian guide had to go like a mile around out of the way because he was not permitted to walk down the street. And you'll see in the video, this woman is walking, this young woman from America is walking down the street, and you can see what happened to her. I got stopped by the Israeli police. I've been there twice, and I've been stopped both times. Last time wasn't so bad. Once a settler tried to drive me in a car because she figured out I wasn't Orthodox Jewish, and that because I had pants on and I didn't have a head covering, and that I was probably a volunteer with the Palestinians, so she tried to run me over with her car. But that's what they do. They run over children, school children with the car. They throw things at the children as they're trying to go to school. It's a really ghastly situation. So, these are things, events and things that are happening in situations that are never covered in the American media. This is why I do this, because I want you to know what's going on, and then please share it. So here's this video. It's very moving. Let me start at the beginning. Okay. All right, where is the sound? I think let me get off full screen. I think I may have reduced the sound on this. Oh, here it is. Yeah, okay. Here we go. There's always a reason, always some button you didn't press. All right, let's start again.
This is what I experienced minutes after setting foot in my family's hometown. We literally just got here. We went through the first military checkpoint, and a bunch of soldiers stopped us, started yelling at us. I'm in the old city of Hebron in the occupied West Bank, a place that once bustled with life. But I'm about to see what Israel's occupation and settlers have done to the heart of this city and to the people who live here. I'm a Palestinian-American journalist, and I've spent much of my career reporting on the occupied territories. But Hebron, one of the West Bank's largest cities, is also my roots. My father was born and raised here. I've returned to learn how the occupation has decimated his beloved hometown, a place he hasn't been back to in years.
I had a mixed feeling, nostalgia with anger. Despair over despair, what can I say?
I know it's really hard for him to see this, and so it's emotional for me. So we're officially on our way to Hebron. My team and I are going to Hebron's old city, which is ground zero of Israeli apartheid. Today, 33,000 Palestinians live in this part of Hebron, which is under full Israeli military control and fragmented by checkpoints, military outposts, and around 1,000 Israeli settlers who live here in violation of international law.
اللي حصل في البلد القديم في مدينة الخليفة كارثة بندفع ثمنها كل يوم.
حياتكم هم صعبة.
هي صعبة ومستحيل وحدة تقعد محل تجرب تقعد أسبوع.
إحنا عايشين هون بس باعتبار السجن.
But before we get into all of that, let me back up. It wasn't always like this. This is my dad. He was born in Hebron in 1947. He lived up the hill from the old city where his father and uncle owned a quarry. The year after my dad was born, Israel was established and Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe. That's because hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from their homes to clear the way for the creation of a Jewish state. But the West Bank, including Hebron, fell under the control of Jordan. My dad was 19 in June of 1967 when Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, and began a military occupation that still has no end in sight. My dad was in college in Jordan at that time, so he wasn't in Hebron to witness that or to see how Jewish settlers took over parts of the old city. A few years later, he moved to the US for graduate school. I was born and raised in San Francisco and grew up hearing my dad reminisce about his childhood, like how he raised chickens and rabbits on the hill as he watched the vibrant city below. When my family would travel to Palestine in the summers, my dad couldn't come because of work. Now, even though he's retired, he says he doesn't want to return because he refuses to be humiliated by Israeli soldiers. He's only been back to Hebron 3 times. But I'm returning to see with my own eyes what has become of the city that made my father and me who we are today. And that all begins with me actually getting there. It's only about 20 miles from Ramallah where we're starting out, but we can't, as Palestinians, access parts of the main north-south highway because that's reserved exclusively for cars with Israeli license plates. So here's another checkpoint. Instead, we have to take narrower roads and cross through several Israeli military checkpoints. There's another checkpoint. It takes much, much longer to get there. We're finally in Hebron. I'm sure my dad knows the streets inside and out, and he used to walk all over here as a child. So this is literally retracing his footsteps, but it's very different now than when he grew up. Today, many parts of the city are off limits to Palestinians. All right, gonna go through. Because I'm Palestinian, I'm not allowed to enter parts of the old city. So I'm meeting former Israeli soldiers who I hope will help me access my family's hometown. Hi, how are you, Ori? Nice to meet you. I'm Dina. Ori and Joel are with the Israeli anti-occupation group Breaking the Silence. They used to serve in the Israeli army, but now they give tours of Hebron to expose the reality of how Israel treats Palestinians. Come in. But before they could even start showing me around, this happened.
היא אזרחית ארצות הברית ועיתונאית, כן? רק שתדעו. היא אזרחית ארצות הברית ועיתונאית.
אין שום בעיה, הוא צילם עמדה ביטחונית, הוא צריך למחוק את הסרטונים האלה.
אני לא צילמתי את העמדה, צילמתי לך אותה.
לא, צילמת את עמדה. זה לא משנה, אם היא עמדה ליד העמדה, אתה מוחק...
דבר ראשון, אתה מפריע לנו בעבודה, ואתה עומד שם עם המצלמה. דבר ראשון. עכשיו דוחף לי. יופי, דוחף אותו, כרגע הוא מפריע לי בעבודה.
My Palestinian film crew, who have the proper credentials, are sadly used to experiencing this kind of nationalistic harassment and taunting. So I've been in the old city for about 5 minutes and we were already stopped by... We literally just got here and a bunch of soldiers stopped us, started yelling at us, started harassing my cameraman. They just asked to see our IDs. I showed my US passport. To all of a sudden have like 6 or 7 armed Israeli soldiers just swarm you. It's honestly really upsetting that this is how you get welcomed to your own home city. The former soldiers I'm spending the day with say this is a typical scene.
When you consider the fact that they grew up in Israeli society, they have education and media and the political system, all of those elements are telling them that Arabs are scary, Palestinians are bad. And then they get an opportunity when they're in the army, they have power in their hands, and it's not surprising that they use it.
Finally, the soldiers give us back our IDs.
Let's continue, right? It's a very classic demonstration of one of the elements of the occupation, which is complete arbitrary, right? And every soldier in the occupied territory has the authority on his own decision to detain anyone for 3 hours. Yeah. So we were not delayed here for 3 hours. We are going to continue our tour, obviously, but it's an example.
What a way to start the day.
I'm about to learn that what I just experienced is nothing compared to what the Palestinians who live here go through every day. This is Fadl, who has lived in this home his whole life. In the 1980s, Israel set up this checkpoint in front of his house. Fadl now has to check in every time he leaves or enters his own home. كيف بتضايقوا عليكم؟
زي ما انت شايفه خلوش قرايبنا يجوا عليهم. يعني بنت متجوزه مين مسموح لها تيجي جوزها لا.
وهلا لما بتمرق ايش لازم تفرجيه؟
اسمه ورقمه.
وانت بتقدر تمشي هون مش ممنوع.
بس لحديت.
Wow. Fadl isn't alone. Thousands of other Palestinians in Hebron are also forced to pass military checkpoints just to go home. The military also bans Palestinians from using certain streets, as Ori shows me.
On that street over there, Palestinians are allowed to walk and open businesses, but not allowed to drive. The yellow street on the map is a street where Palestinians are only allowed to walk, not allowed to drive, and not allowed to open businesses. The streets that we're heading towards are mostly sterile, meaning that no Palestinian in the whole wide world can walk on those streets. If you do one step over here, no Palestinians are allowed here. If we take one step here, here Palestinians are allowed. And I don't know any other word to call this than apartheid.
All these restrictions help Israel maintain its hold on Hebron, but they're also in place to protect Israeli settlers. And the ones in Hebron are known for being among the most violent in all of the occupied West Bank.
Our order in Hebron is protect the Jewish settlers, right? We don't have an order protect Palestinians if settlers harass
The
them.
soldiers never protect the Palestinians.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not in our order.
This is kind of a common sight here in the Old City. There's a Palestinian family that lives at the end of this alleyway. Above them is an Israeli settlement. And because the settlers throw garbage down at them, they have to put these nets here to protect them.
يعني هنا لما اجى يعتقلوني هون بالضبط اعتقلوني.
كنتي هون بالضبط؟
كنت بالضبط هون. لما اجى يعتقلوني بالضبط هون كنت.
The family at the end of the alley is the Siders. Just a few weeks before I arrived to Hebron, nearby settlers accused their 13-year-old daughter, Selwa, of picking a knife up off the ground.
فقد كل شيء معيش ولا سكينة اعتقلوني واخذوني يعني على بس أسامة وقعدوا يحاولوا معي قعدت ساعة لما حققوا معي لما فلتوني قعدت ساعة لما فلتوني يعني كثير ساعات لما فلتوني وحققوا معي
بتخافي يعتقلوكي كمان مرة؟
أنا حسيت إنه وأنا نايمة حسيت إنه بدهم يعتقلوني بنص الليل.
We're standing here and I'm talking to her in front of her home, and every time we hear a noise, she looks up. And I asked her, "Are you afraid the settlers are throwing something down at you?" And she said, "Yeah, لأنه بصير كتير إنه بيرموا عليكم."
كتير بصير. يعني إذا شفناهم بيلعبوا خلاص بدهم يرمونا بدهم يعملوا لنا يرموا علينا حجر وإحنا نقعد نتفرج عليهم يعني.
ولاد المستوطنين.
طبعا ولاد المستوطنين. يعني أخي صدق لي يطلع محل ألعابهم.
حرام.
كيف بيلعبوا وإحنا نفس خلينا ننزل عندهم نلعب قلت لك كيف ننزل هذا احتلال. كمان إحنا ما بنقدرش يعني ننزل من مرة من هون 24 ساعة في الدار. زي باعتبار السجن.
Just talking to her, it's really you don't feel safe at all. Like it's not a life that people should or can accept. So how did Hebron end up feeling like a prison for its people? After the Israeli occupation began in 1967, Hebron was among the first places Jewish settlements were built. This illegal land grab captured international attention.
Now there's pressure for large-scale Jewish resettlement. And to some people, this looks very much like colonization.
Some settlers said they were coming to Hebron because of its sacred place in Judaism, as the burial site of Prophet Abraham and his family. Others said they moved there in response to a massacre of Jews that happened in 1929. That's when rising tensions over European Jewish immigration aimed at turning Palestine into a Jewish state led to violence. More than 60 Jews were killed, and homes and synagogues were destroyed in the ancient city. But even after the settlers moved in, Hebron streets weren't segregated. Then, in 1994, everything changed. An American-Israeli settler armed with an assault rifle entered the Ibrahimi Mosque during Ramadan and killed 29 Palestinians.
Palestinian fury as the victims of the mosque massacre are rushed to hospital in Hebron. Doctors say most were shot in the back as they knelt to pray.
The shooter was ultimately overpowered by survivors and killed. But today, many Israelis in nearby settlements continue to honor him. In response to this massacre and the unrest that followed, Israel punished the victims, closing off roads and choking the economic lifeblood of this Palestinian city. You know, we're just seeing so many empty houses, empty storefronts, Israeli flags everywhere, soldiers stationed everywhere checking us. Since the crackdown, over 1,500 Palestinian-owned shops have closed for good, and more than 1,000 Palestinian families have moved away from Hebron city center. They have decimated the old city Israel has. And it's really unfortunate to see. I mean, this should be a thriving, bustling marketplace right now, and it's completely empty.
Look at these empty homes. Used to be the prime real estate in the West Bank.
She's harassing a Palestinian right now, just because he's
basically
sweeping.
What
sweeping.
we can just see here. I've seen it in the street. They just tried to clean around the military post to do their job. Yeah, because this is still a street where Palestinians are allowed to walk. And this settler woman told them that they shouldn't enter there. They cannot enter this, even though it's a military post.
Excuse me, please don't touch our camera. That's wild. The settler woman got mad at the Palestinian for sweeping the street, and then she attacked us and our cameras and tried to block us from filming. Many of Hebron's settlers moved here from the United States. Sadio came from Brooklyn a few years ago. Does it bother you that you're living somewhere so heavily militarized where Palestinians that have been here for generations are getting kicked out of their houses and can't walk on certain streets?
So I'll ignore the use of the term Palestinian since there is no such nation or people. It doesn't bother me at all. Militarization is a thing happening all across the world. I'm not up to anything and nobody's invading my space for no reason. I don't care.
يعني أكثر من مرة الأولاد الصغار كان عندهم واقفين نزل المستوطن كان يدبهم على تحت.
يحملهم يدبهم؟
والله كان يحملهم على تحت.
كيف بيعاملوك المستوطنين اللي عايشين هون؟
ما عملتهم يعني من مرة مش بني آدمين. يعني بعدوا بطبوا بضربوا. البنت بتخاف تنزل، المرأة بتخاف تنزل.
قبل كم من يوم أخوي حجر صوان هون انتفخ.
مين رمى الحجر؟
المستوطن.
So why do you give these tours?
It's extremely important to show people what the occupation looks like, because this war is very vague for most people, right? Occupation. And when you see here, when you walk on those segregated streets, you cannot ignore the reality. And I believe that it's my responsibility as someone who took part in it. The minimum that I can do is to try and show people what I was sent to do. I believe that any decent human being who will see this will want this to end.
So we're going to attempt to enter Shuhada Street right now. No Palestinians are allowed to be on that street, only Israelis and foreigners. I'm going to enter on my U.S. passport. Of course, I'm originally Palestinian, so we'll see how that goes. While all of Hebron's old city has been affected by the occupation, the most striking example might be Shuhada Street. It used to be the city's most important, vibrant thoroughfare. My dad went to middle school on this road, and his family owned shops here. But in the years following the 1994 massacre, Palestinians have been banned from walking on this street, even if they live on it. So the Israeli military welded these Palestinian doors shut.
Well, we actually welded shut their doors. We send Israeli soldiers to weld shut those front doors of these families, while everyone else who's not a Palestinian can walk freely.
This video shows what it takes for one Palestinian woman to leave her home. She climbs her roof and scales back down to the ground to exit on a back street where she is allowed to be. But if you're a Jewish settler, you can walk out in the front, in your front of your front door. Yeah.
Look at us, not only if you're a Jewish settler. Everyone who is not a Palestinian.
إمتى آخر مرة مشيتي على شارع شهداء؟
يمكن من 25 سنة.
25 سنة، يعني كل يوم تطلع عليه وممنوع.
كل يوم بطلع عليه عمل هو مشيت كان تبنا بدنا نروح مثلا هاي الكارنتينا بدنا طاعم الاولاد امشي هذه المسافه كلها على الكارنتينا كانت كلها فاتحه المحلات وسوق الخضره والسيارات ما في حد.
This is the old central bus station in Hebron, and they've turned it into a new military base that's under construction there, and behind it is a new settlement.
Over here, we can walk and have a look on the old jewelry market. This whole thing is a settlement.
This is how absolutely devastated it is right now. Settlers came and just ravaged the whole place and destroyed it. This is the old fruit and vegetable market. It was here, and now what does the sign say, Ori?
Now this is a settlement.
The old city has suffered. Everywhere you look, there's just deserted shops, deserted homes, destruction, broken windows. And in the middle of it all, there's like schools and settlements and Israeli settlers just living their lives with the full protection of the military. You know, one thing that's really striking being here is how incredibly silent it is. The only sound you hear is the flutter of these little Israeli flags above. I keep thinking about how, you know, I directly descend from here. Not only is it like sad on just a human level, but there's a very personal element to this street as well. I don't blame my dad for not wanting to come back because it's that messed up. So I'm trying to piece together exactly where my dad grew up. You know, I've pieced together that that's where my family's home is. And the view is of a bunch of Israeli flags and a military outpost on the hill over there. And in between them, the cemetery where my grandparents are buried and the home that my father grew up in. So, man, I wonder if he's awake right now. I should FaceTime him. Hi, Baba.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
I want to show you. I think this is where you grew up. Is this?
This is still have a street.
Yeah, this is Shuhada. There's nobody here except for some soldiers and a few settlers. It's a total ghost town.
During the day, you see people at the market, and at night, I could see the singing and the dancing, and it was like the heart of the city. Sad, so sad.
It's so sad.
Well, I had a mixed feeling, nostalgia with anger.
This is the old vegetable market. Does this look familiar to you?
Exactly. I used to go sometimes in the morning in the summer to buy cactus pear. This is despair over despair. What can I say?
How does it make you feel showing your dad?
I don't know. I feel really sad. Like, he grew up right there. You know, his parents are buried right there. And I know it's really hard for him to see this. And so it's emotional for me. My dad wanted to talk to Ori.
Hello, my friend.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I'm glad you are for peace. When counting on people like you to expose them. Why?
I really hope you can be here and visit your childhood home at some point. Really, really hope.
You know what? I looking at the big cells all over. I am physically in San Francisco, but spiritually and emotionally always in Hebron.
I'm curious, how did you feel watching me talk to my dad and then speaking to him yourself?
Like sad, responsible, that this is what the place that I grew up in, that I was so proud of when I was a child. This is what we're actually doing to people. And it feels horrible to feel that.
What most haunts you and your conscience about what you did in your time as a soldier?
For me, it's the routine way we control the Palestinians, right? A Palestinian can wake up in the morning and not know if he will be at work on time, go to sleep, not know if soldiers will invade his home. We basically control the most simple and basic elements of life.
It's designed to break down the population of Palestinians and show them who's in charge and humiliate them on a daily basis.
Exactly. How can we make 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank to feel that they cannot lift their head up? We will make them understand that we control their lives. The segregated roads and the settlements and so forth, they exist all around the occupied territories. And military activity, home invasions, patrols, digital surveillance, they exist here and they exist all over the West Bank. The difference in Hebron is that in a very short walk, we can see examples of all of it.
All of it.
All of
We
it.
saw all of it. It was a heavy day, but before it ended, I wanted to visit my father's childhood home. As I stood on the roof overlooking the old city, I thought about how the landscape today is completely different from the one he looked out at when he stood in this same spot. And I couldn't stop thinking about everyone I met and the price they're paying for remaining. رغم ذلك انت ضايل هون.
طبعا دار بيتنا وين
بس في غيرك سافر وهاجر.
في اللي معه مصاري بيطلع، احنا على باب الله. الحمد لله.
عمرك فكرتي ترحلي هون؟
لا.
ليه؟
ما هو كل مشاكلي معاهم عشان ارحل من هون. ملايين دفعوا له. اخر مره زهقوا حطوا لي شك مفتوح. ما قبلت.
وانت مش راضيه؟
وانا مش راضيه.
ليش مش راضيه؟
ما خلص، ما هو اذا هذه راحت شو بده يضل؟ اذا اخذ البيت شو بده يضل؟
تسعة من الصافي وانا عمري بعين الصافي. انا بحب بنتي تكون قويه على حالها.
انا ابي حالي قويه.
يا لما اجي اعتقل بنتي اعطاني درس الاحتلال، اعطاني اياه اذا انت ضابط اسرائيلي تتعامل مع البنت هيك. شو بدك يكون بيني وبينك السلام؟ انا اقول لك شغله واحده، اذا انا مش حامي حالي، يعني انا ماشي هون انا مش حامي حالي، كيف بدي احمي اولادي انا؟
It's hard to shake the idea that this Palestinian father could have been my dad. I could have been Salwa. This could have been my life.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video from El Khalil here in Hebron. Let me know in the comments what surprised you most about this experience, about this place, and stay tuned for the rest of our videos in our series filmed here in the occupied West Bank. Next up, I have a video looking at the Palestinian Christian minority here.
Wow, that was amazing. For me, welcome, John. Nice to see you. For me, this is especially moving because I was just there last month and I experienced much of what this young Palestinian woman experienced, and it broke my heart. The group Breaking the Silence, if you don't know about them, you should look them up and feel encouraged, because they're all ex-IDF soldiers who feel that what they had to do while they were in the Israeli military violated their consciences. And they have a big, very large group of ex-Israeli soldiers and who spend time educating people. They travel around the country. They come to the United States and give talks. They provide tours. I went on a bus with them during a lull in the Gaza war of 2014, and we were going to go to Gaza. We were on a bus with Muslims. I was the only American on the bus, of course, but there were Palestinians, both Christian, Muslim. There were Israelis on the bus. Sheikh Ibrahim Al-Hawa, my good friend who runs the House of Peace on Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, was there. And we traveled to hospitals. First we went to the Arab hospitals in East Jerusalem to visit casualties of the 2014 war, which was just heartbreaking. Young children, you may remember when those children were shot on a beach in Gaza. They were playing on a beach, and the one surviving child was in the hospital. He was having his legs amputated. We met many of the wounded people from Gaza in 2 Palestinian hospitals in Jerusalem. And then we went to Tel Aviv to visit IDF soldiers who also were injured in that 2014 war, who were in Tel Aviv in Israeli hospitals. And that was very interesting to go. And actually some of the soldiers' families were very angry with us, didn't want us to visit, but the soldiers themselves were glad to see us because they really realize, many of them realize what they're doing is total violation of Jewish ethics and morality. So, but the Hebron situation is horrific, and I invite all of you to pay particular attention in the next few weeks, because I believe that because those settlers are so violent under the old regime, now with Netanyhu and the new regime, they're going to become even more violent, and hopefully that there won't be a horrific loss of life. I'm not sure I can hear you. Is somebody trying to say something? Okay, all right. So let's continue with the next amazing video that's truly astonishing, which is the video that is about how Zionists collaborated with the Nazis. Now, this is a controversial topic, and people get very upset when you say this, but I have a degree in history, and I studied American history and European history. And I remember even when I was in school, seeing information about how the Zionists collaborated with the Nazis because they wanted to have settlers, and they made a deal with them. Now, from what I remember, I haven't seen this podcast, but they made a deal with the Nazis to leave the old elderly and the handicapped Jews behind for the Nazis to slaughter or do whatever, and then in exchange for letting some of the younger and more robust people immigrate to Israel. So I'm not sure if that's true, and I'm not sure if that's in the video, but that was one of the things that I remember very clearly reading and being totally shocked by. So I think the basic problem, and this is an issue with many of my Jewish friends and family, and is that the legitimacy of the state of Israel is a problem, because the way it was founded was so brutal and so awful, and violated so many tenets of Judaism. And when most Jews were against Zionism and were against the founding of the state of Israel, and people forget that because they don't know it, it's never been taught. But when Zionism emerged, it was a minority fringe view in Judaism, and most Jewish authorities rejected Zionism. They felt that it, number one, for a practical reason, they felt it would endanger Jewish lives in other countries in the Middle East, which is what happened. And there were strong communities in Morocco, Algeria, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, all over the Middle East had strong Jewish communities who were very prominent and did very well in these Muslim communities. Actually, today, I think Iran still has their Minister of the Treasury is a Jew. So the Jews who lived in the Middle East did not want the founding of the state of Israel the way the Zionists were planning. Also, other Jews felt it was a violation of the Torah. It was a violation of Jewish teaching. And actually, there's still a large group of Orthodox Jews that lead Palestinian protests because they feel that Israel, the state of Israel, is a violation of Judaism and Jewish ethics and Jewish morality.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So there's a lot of Jews that actually lead the protests for the Palestinians, that are Orthodox Jews. And then, of course, you have your secular leftist Jews who people like Jewish Voice for Peace and Tal Ruach and other Jewish groups who are against the occupation and are against Zionism because they recognize the apartheid quality. So the problem is that the very assumptions that the state of Israel were founded on are questionable, even according to Jews. Besides the fact it was the Zionists were basically terrorists. Remember, they blew up the King George Hotel with killing many British and also Italian and other diplomats in Jerusalem. And Golda Meir was involved in that. So, and all of the terrorist leaders of the various Jewish Zionist groups all became prime ministers and high officials in the Israeli government later. So there's a case we made to challenge the legitimacy of the state of Israel. However, the practicality is Israel is there. There are thousands of Israelis who are living there, born there, and we just have to figure out how to make some kind of peace with them. We're not going to, neither side is going to exterminate and get rid of the other side. Now, the extremists on both the right and left, whether it's Palestine or Israel, They hope they're just going to eliminate the others, but it's not going to happen. So we have to figure out some way of maintaining some kind of harmony, and that will involve the right of return. It will involve reparations. It will involve dismantling settlements and all these things that are going to be very difficult, if not impossible, under this Netanyahu's far-right coalition. So let's see this video, and this should give us kind of energy when we discuss the whole Israeli state, to understand how flawed its origins were. And that should help us in the discussion of why Israel needs to make profound changes in its system of treating Palestinians, and a system of and accepting the right of return, accepting reparations, because of the way it was founded. So let's look at this very profound and important video. Does anyone have anything they want to say before we start watching the video about what we talked about? Okay, let's go. This is a killer. This is, buckle your seatbelt. This is going, you're going to be knocked off your chair when you see this.
The Holocaust is exploited mercilessly by the Zionist movement. The Zionists have tied the Holocaust very closely to the narrative that Israel is a refuge, is a defense, is an answer to anti-Semitism.
The Electronic Intifada.
The Electronic Intifada.
The Electronic Intifada.
This is the Electronic Intifada podcast. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman.
And I'm Asa Winstanley. Well, we're here today with Tony Greenstein, who will be familiar to many of our listeners and viewers. But for those of you who are not, Tony Greenstein is a veteran of the Palestine Solidarity Movement in the UK. He's an activist and a blogger. He's an iconoclastic and uncompromising Jewish anti-Zionist. His blog, for many years, to me, has been really an invaluable source. I mean, I've relied on it for a lot of my journalism. And I regard it as an essential source for anyone in the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Tony pulls no punches, and he always speaks the truth, the unvarnished truth, shall we say, as he sees it. And I always learn something new from Tony's blogs. He's the author of a new book called Zionism During the Holocaust, which will be out to buy soon. I've got my copy of it here, and which viewers on the YouTube will be able to see. And I think I'm going to be reviewing it at some point for EI. But I think for now I can say that it's an essential read, and that I mean I learned a lot from it. So we're going to sort of go through some of it in this episode of the podcast. It's so, as the title suggests, it's on a topic that is often, to many, majorly controversial, which is the issue of the Zionist movement's historical collaboration with the far right, even including Nazi Germany. So with that preamble, Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Asa and Nora.
Thanks for being
So
with
tell us about your book and what inspired you to write it.
Okay, thanks. Well, the first book was about Zionist collaboration with the Nazis, was nearly 40 years ago by Lenny Brenner, and there's been nothing since. There's been a lot of research and a lot of journal articles and books and so on, but there's been nothing from an anti-Zionist perspective. And I felt it was necessary to do so, because as we can see today, the Holocaust is exploited mercilessly by the Zionist movement. I mean, the very false definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA, is produced or used by a group which calls itself the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So the Zionists have tied the Holocaust very closely to the narrative that Israel is a refuge, is a defense, is an answer to anti-Semitism. And I thought it's extremely important to actually look at what happened during the Holocaust. What was a Zionist record then? Because you would assume from the way they use it now, that the Zionists were to the forefront of trying to save Jews, trying to support Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe, to try to open the avenues of rescue. But so anyone reading the book, I think, will be quite amazed by the fact that the Zionists during the war saw the Holocaust as a complete distraction in their own efforts, which were to build
Something wrong with the audio?
previous to that with Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, when the killing squads, the Ansatz group, and went in the wake of the German army, mopping up Jews in Galicia and the Ukraine, White Russia, and so on. But the Zionists have, during that time, as I say, not only were not bothered about the Holocaust, they actively tried to stop anyone who wanted to provide a refuge from doing so. And that was the amazing thing. They had a weird and incredible logic. It was their logic. And the Zionist logic was that where there are Jews, there is anti-Semitism. Jews cause anti-Semitism because they are living in the countries of other people. In the words of A.B. Yehoshua, they are guests in other people's hotels, and of course they've outstayed their welcome. So simply transplanting Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe to America or Britain would not solve the problem. It would simply recreate anti-Semitism in another place. So you had to be cruel to be kind and say the only place of settlement was Palestine. And that is why they actively, and this is on record, Selig Brzezski in 1943, who was the president of the Jewish Board of Deputies, he actively sabotaged the rescue efforts of the chair of the Chief Rabbi's Rescue Committee, Rabbi Schonfield, a very distinguished rabbi and doctor. He actively sabotaged his rescue attempts. He got a signatory petition from 40, 50 parliamentarians, bishops, and various other worthies, peers, and so on, saying, open the doors. Because in 1942, with the Allied declaration on the 17th of December that there was a Holocaust, people didn't realize at first that the Nazis weren't just killing Jews in pogroms, but were actually systematically exterminating them. It was a mass wave of revulsion, and 80% of British people said, let them in, regardless. The British government, of course, did not agree, and that was a Labour coalition government as well, under Herbert Morrison, the Home Secretary. Schonfield was appointed by the Chief Rabbi, Dr. Hertz, and Dr. Solomon Schonfield was his name, and he had all these rescue schemes which he wanted to put into operation. And the Board of Deputies under Selig Brzezski had become president in 1940. Previously, it was in the hands of the bourgeois anti-Zionists, but once he got his hands on the board, and the Zionists did, they set their face against any rescue at all whatsoever. But this is a kind of history which is unknown. But I mean, I quoted the article in the Jewish Chronicle, a letter in the Jewish Chronicle from Marcus Retter, who was his close assistant, who goes through it. And there was a correspondence in the Jewish Chronicle, and the historian of the British Jewish community today, Dr. Jeffrey Alderman, wrote a letter in response to the daughter of Selig Brzezski, saying, yes, everything that Marcus Retter says is correct. And you don't have to believe him. You can go back to the correspondence columns of the Jewish Chronicle, where Brzezski defends what he did, because he said this was not the proper way to do it. You have to go through the official channels. So he was more concerned about procedure and protocol when people were literally 10,000 a day were burning in Auschwitz. And that is, if you like, an illustration of the depths of depravity of the Zionist movement. And it has to be said, I mean, the bourgeois anti-Zionists, I mean, were not brilliant by any means when they led the border deputies. Have no doubt about that. But they were responsible for the Kinder transport in 1938-39, which rescued 10,000 German Jewish children and brought them to England. And maybe I can quote from my book, because they are quite relevant. It's from David Ben-Gurion, who became the first Prime Minister of Israel, the longest serving Prime Minister until Netanyahu, and he was then chair of the Jewish Agency, which was a quasi-government in waiting. And he said about this plan to bring 10,000 Jewish children over, he said, if I knew that it would be possible to save all the children in Germany by bringing them over to England, and only half of them by transporting them to Eretz Yisrael, then I would opt for the second alternative. But we must weigh not only the life of these children, but also the history of the people of Israel. And he wasn't, of course, the only person who said that. I mean, Chaim Weizmann was equally blunt. If I can find the quotes, and I probably won't. Yes, it was from Malcolm MacDonald. He was the colonial secretary at the time, and he recalled, and this is in Nicholas Bethel's book for anyone who's interested in the source, but it's all in the book. He said, I remember at the time that Weizmann's attitude shocked me. He insisted on the children going to Palestine. As far as he was concerned, it was Palestine or nowhere. And when MacDonald refused to guarantee the children would go to Palestine, Weizmann told him that we shall fight you. And when I say fight, I mean fight. So, I mean, that was the Zionist attitude during the war. Indeed, the first proposal to set up Yad Vashem, which is Israel's Holocaust propaganda museum, came in 1943 or 44 from Moshe Shenhavi. It was in I think it was 1943. When most of the Jews were still alive, he was proposing to set up a memorial to those who were still alive. I mean, they were calculating after the war how best they could make use of those who were going to die. And that is, I say, the utter depravity of it.
Chaim Weizmann, of course, Chaim Weizmann, just for our listeners' clarification, was the first president of the Israeli state, right?
And a very long-standing president of the World Zionist Organization before that, a major figure in Zionist history. So, I mean, that was their attitude. So today, of course, you won't get an inkling of that. And anyone who speaks out about it will be damned. I mean, not just me, Ben Hecht, who was a revisionist Zionist, was attacked as a, he was demonized. And he was a right-wing Zionist, but he wrote about a book called Perfidy in 1961-62 about the Kastner trial, which I can go into later in Israel, the trial of a collaborator, a major collaborator.
Yeah, I want to get into that a bit later, Kastner.
Yeah. And Hannah Arendt was another. I mean, she was probably the greatest political philosopher of the last century, herself a refugee from Nazi Germany. She wrote a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, which touched on some of these themes because she saw through the Eichmann trial, which was a show trial, because everyone knew Eichmann was guilty, of course. I mean, he deserved whatever happened to him, but the trial itself, as she said, exonerated Hitler and Himmler, because the trial judges or the appeal court in Israel found that Eichmann was solely responsible for what he had done. Not Hitler, Eichmann. You know, I mean, we can say what we want about Eichmann, but he was acting on orders from Hitler, clearly. But she wrote a book which touched on some of these issues, the very issues the Eichmann trial had been designed to avoid, which was the Kastner trial before it. And she was, you know, persona non grata. I mean, she was accused of being a Holocaust denier, a Nazi, and everything else. So I don't expect it's going to be received with welcome by the Jewish Chronicle.
That's a badge of honor.
Yeah.
In fact, there's already been one review by Jenny Fraser, who wrote an article in, I think, the Jewish News. Described the book as anti-Semitic. She hasn't read a word of it, but she knows it's anti-Semitic. So
Amazing.
there you
Amazing.
go.
I love it when people review books they have not read. It's very telling. I was reading the final few chapters of your book today, Tony, and in the conclusions, you write, quote, "The Zionist movement consciously ignored the Holocaust while it was occurring, even to the point of denying or questioning whether it was happening. Throughout the war, achieving Jewish statehood was the overriding priority." Now, this is a really significant conclusion that you've reached. It's a really big claim, which some of our listeners may find quite shocking. Could you lay out some of the, I mean, obviously you don't have time to go through the entire book, but could you lay out some of the evidence that you put forward for this in your book?
Well, after the Allied declaration, on the 23rd of November, the Jewish Agency, which had been in possession of information about the Holocaust for 3 months, that is from August. This is the most intense period of the Holocaust. Probably 1.5 million Jews died in those 3 months alone in 1942. They simply sat on the news of it. I mean, Stephen Weiss, who was the leader of American Jewry, boasted openly that I have been keeping it under wraps and not publicizing it. It was at the request of the State Department, regardless. The fact is, they simply kept quiet about it until they were forced to do that because the third load of exchange prisoners, that is, prisoners who had been exchanged with Nazi Germany, Jews, arrived in Palestine. They described what was happening. They could no longer keep quiet about it. So they issued a statement on the 23rd of November 1942. The Allies followed suit very quickly afterwards on the 17th of December 1942. So that, yes, it wasn't just random killings, it wasn't large-scale pogroms, it was a systematic extermination of the Jewish people of Europe. And that was significant. But yet, even after that, the Zionists then simply reprinted Nazi propaganda in Ostland, a Nazi paper, saying there were 55 ghettos still in Poland, but 2 million Jews were still alive out of the 3.3 million. And this was, well, it was just a total lie. I mean, there's barely any Jews left by the end of 1942. Poland had been combed thoroughly. There were, I think, 2 or 3 ghettos, the Warsaw Ghetto, but most of its inhabitants had already been transported to Treblinka. There was Lodz, which was the second largest city, second largest ghetto in Europe. And there were 1 or 2 fragments dotted around, but at least 2.5 million, I would say, of Poland's Jewry had been exterminated by then. So the Zionists simply swallowed hook, line, and sinker the claim that there were 55 or 53, the number varies, Jewish ghettos left in Poland. It was simply not true, yet they repeated it. And throughout, I mean, they dismissed it. They continued to cast doubt the newspapers. So, I mean, a newspaper would print reports, and then would have an editorial saying, these figures can't be trusted, they may well be an exaggeration, we shouldn't overemphasize, and so on. But they also said, to be quite honest, I mean, people like Nathan Schwab, who was the Herr representative in Geneva, were quite open. He said, well, the Allies have their casualties in the war and we have ours. And that's how they saw them. They were just the Jewish casualties in the battle to get a Jewish state. So if you accept their logic, and the logic of Zionism is that a Jewish state was everything. That was the main and sole goal. And of course, there will be casualties along the way. And you have to see Zionism as a racial project to perpetuate the Jewish people. You can't understand it any other way. It wasn't a refuge, to create a refuge for Jews or anything else. It was a perpetuation of the Jewish nation race. And that's why today, I mean, I've given examples in my book, assimilation is compared to the Holocaust. Why? Because if you assimilate, if you marry out, you're a Jew to a non-Jew and disappear, that's the same as disappearing in the gas chamber. That's the logic. And in fact, the Harvard has the slogan, assimilation is a Jewish Holocaust, or intermarriage is a Jewish Holocaust. So they are quite open about it. And I give a number of examples in it, in the book. If you look up assimilation, then you will find them. If you want, I can quote to you. Let me just do a search. If I can.
I mean, the anti-assimilation and interracial marriage, it's part of the law in Israel.
Yes, that's right. I mean,
they've codified it.
Yes.
In order to grow, a Jewish Zionist population.
Yeah, and Arthur Rupin, I mean, he wrote in his book, The Jews' War of Survival, that the Nazi race laws, the Nuremberg laws, were, and I quote, returning to Judaism those Jews who had been lost to it because of increased assimilation in Germany. So, I mean, even while it was happening, the Zionists were the only ones to welcome the Nuremberg laws because they actually, as Rupin put it, they were returning Jews, even what was called Christian Jews, this phenomena, a Jew who converted to Christianity under Nazi race laws was still Jewish. The Zionists were quite happy about that. They were returning the sinners to the fold, as it were. So this is the logic. I mean, the Zionists accepted the Nazi definition of Jews as a race, an alien race, of course. So it's all put together. But of course, today, they don't mention these things for obvious reasons.
Yeah, you're starting to get into more now about the kind of ideological foundations of Zionism and the kind of, I suppose, racialized reasons for the Zionist leadership's support for the Nazis in the 1930s.
Welcome, Adele.
And I think this is a real strength of your book, is that you really lay out the whole history of it. You mentioned earlier Lenny Brenner's book, Zionism in the Age of Dictators, from 1983, which I've also read, and it's a much shorter book than yours, and it's also, I mean, obviously, it's still very good, I think, but it's kind of out of date in certain respects now. Could you talk a little bit more about the ideological foundations of Zionism and explain a little bit more about Arthur Rupin, who you've already mentioned, and the reasons why, which the foundations of Zionism, which led to which ended up in the Zionist movement in Germany in the 1930s, offering their support to Adolf Hitler?
Okay, I think we have to be careful that I wouldn't necessarily say they offered their support to Adolf Hitler so much as the Zionist movement saw. I mean, most Jews, when Hitler came to power in January 30th, 1933, were horror-stricken. They could see that this wasn't simply just another anti-Semitic regime, of which there were quite a few in Eastern Europe, but this was something totally different. It was a fascist regime which had anti-Semitism at the core of its policies, and anyone could see that this posed a serious threat to the survival of the German Jewish community. I mean, it was pretty obvious. So the boycott took off initially. It was spontaneous. People just didn't buy German goods. And 96% of the Jewish community in Britain supported the boycott. When I give the example of a shop in the East End, a toy shop, which was selling German goods. And when someone found out, there were thousands crowding around it, and they had to bring the police in to clear them. They were outraged. He was forced to return the goods to Germany. But the border deputies, of course, opposed the boycott along with the Zionists. The Zionists were opposed from the very start, well before Havara even, to the boycott. So
I mean, Zionism came about. It was a reaction to anti-Semitism. I think we can all agree on that. Excluding, of course, Christian Zionism, which came well before Jewish Zionism, incidentally. Zionism was a different reaction from most Jewish reactions to anti-Semitism. I mean, bourgeois Jews would think that you could reform the country and change the laws and change the attitudes of people, so they propagandized. Socialist Jews and communist Jews believed you had to overthrow the existing system, etc. But the Zionists were unique because they basically accepted the framework of the terms of debate of the anti-Semites. They said the anti-Semites have a case. I mean, let me give you Jacob Klatskin, who was the editor of their paper, Die Welt. He said, if we don't admit the rightfulness of anti-Semitism, we deny the rightfulness of our own nationalism. Instead of establishing societies for defense against the anti-Semites who want to reduce our rights, we should establish societies for defense against our friends who desire to defend our rights. So, I mean, he made it quite clear. I mean, they welcomed anti-Semitism and they agreed that the Jews, because they were a nation that had lost its way, that was living in other nations' countries, had developed asocial characteristics. If you look at this book, you can see it. This was the first pamphlet by Theodor Herzl. Sorry, it's upside down, I know. The Jewish State. And on page, 26, he said the cause of anti-Semitism, its immediate cause, is our excessive production of mediocre intellects who cannot find an outlet downwards or upwards. That is to say, no wholesome outlet in either direction. When we sink, we become a revolutionary proletariat, the subordinate officers of all revolutionary parties. And at the same time, when we rise, there rises also the terrible power of our purse. So, I mean, there you have it. I mean, he accepted all the caricatures. Jews were either too rich or they were revolutionary and subversive. So what was the answer? It was basically to form a Jewish state where Jews would congregate. But Jews had no place in the diaspora, and they called it the accursed galut, galut being exile. Jews were in exile. They had no life of their own, really. Jewish history really begins in Palestine. There was a void of 2,000 years, according to Ben-Gurion. Now, Arthur Rubin was, you mentioned, was, I would say, the most important person, maybe after Ben-Gurion, in the Yishuv, in the Zionist community in Palestine. He went there in about 1907, and from then on, he became director of the Palestine office. And he directed the funds that they got from abroad. And he was really the founder of the kibbutz, or the kibbutzar, as it was, then the smaller version. Not because he was a socialist, I mean, he was a Arabian reactionary. I mean, he was a German nationalist. He condemned Dreyfus, and he only became a Zionist, really, because the anti-Semites rejected him being a German nationalist because he was Jewish. So he decided he had to become a Jewish nationalist instead. But he was a complete racist, and he believed that the Jews of Europe were not Semitic. He didn't believe they had any Semitic blood in them. That was the Arab Jews, who were a dysgenic element. They were a foreign element. And what he did was he brought over Yemenite Jews to Palestine to do the hard work for the kibbutzim. I mean, don't believe they actually made the desert bloom or any of that. And in the words of Etan Bloom, who has written a very interesting PhD thesis for Tel Aviv University, he was guilty of pathological stereotyping. Because they came from the Arab countries, they had much lower wages than anyone else. They had barely had enough food, and they were deprived of medical attention. And 50% of them died as a result in Palestine. And then, you know, in 1920-21, the Zionist organization under Weizmann and him rejected the ability, the applications of Ukrainian Jews who were dying in the pogroms to come to Palestine, because they were the wrong sort of Jews, you see. They were weak, they were feeble, they were refugees. They didn't have the pioneering spirit. They had the wrong socio-economic makeup. You know, they weren't farmers, they were maybe petty traders and what have you. So this idea that Zionism sought to create Israel as a refuge, I mean, is all wrong. It never has been the case. They won't go into disaster spots, use them to pluck out Jews and then put them in the West Bank to settle in the territories, of course. It's not because of any concern for them as individuals or Jews for that matter, but Rupin, I mean, guided the settlement policy. He's called the Fatherland Settlement in Palestine. He was in charge. I mean, with the JNF, of course, they were subordinate. They carried out the buying up of land and the settlements and so on. But Rupin was in overall charge of it. And when Chaim al-Osirov was assassinated in 1933, almost certainly by the revisionist Zionists, the Irgun, because he had been leading the negotiations for Havara, the trading agreement the Zionists instituted with Nazi Germany, Rupin took over. And Nathan Bloom speculates that when he went to Jena, the University of Jena, he met Professor Hans Gunther. Hans Gunther was a professor, the chair of racial anthropology. He was described by Gabriel Pittsburgh, who I mentioned earlier, as the mentor of Himmler. He outlined the racial concepts and ideas, and he was put into the chair by Robert Frick, who was, I think, later hanged at Nuremberg. He was the first Nazi state minister in Germany. He was put into that chair by the Nazi party in that state. And he and Rupin spent a congenial afternoon discussing race theory. And Rupin said of Gunther that his book was a treasure chest of ideas, you know, so that they really did agree. And in his diaries, he says this was a pleasant conversation. Now, in two of the diaries, I think it's in the Hebrew and in the English, this meeting does not appear. Oh, in Spain, who was also the biographer of Herzl. But in Germany, it does. So that's how we know that this meeting took place. And of course, I mean, what he wrote in his diary, we can take it to be fairly accurate when he describes it as a pleasant conversation. And Bloom speculates that this was kind of buttering up the Nazis to agree to the transfer agreement, because the transfer agreement was not a Nazi idea, it was a Zionist idea. And we have to bear that in mind. And of course, all the nonsense about it being aimed to get Jews out of Germany, again, is a whole load of tripe. I mean, you can read my book. The Zionist movement lobbied the Nazis, the Gestapo, not to allow Jews to go out of Germany anywhere but Palestine. And Palestine could only admit 15,000 at maximum a year. So what does that mean? What did that mean? They would stay in Germany and perish.
Yeah, so let's talk about that on that note then. Let's talk about the transfer agreement, the Havara agreement. Could you maybe start by explaining when Hitler first came to power in Germany, what the reaction of the Zionist leadership was?
Oh, well, the reaction of the Zionist movement was...
in Germany?
In Germany, well, yeah, I mean, see if I can find a few quotes for you. I mean, Francis Nicosia, who's the professor of Holocaust studies at Vermont University, he's the Raoul Hilberg professor. I mean, he's pro-Zionist, he's not an anti-Zionist, but he's written two books which give a lot of information, and he writes, so positive was the Zionist assessment of the situation that as early as April 1933, the Zionist Federation of Germany announced its determination to take advantage of the crisis to win over the traditionally assimilationist German Jewry to Zionism. Bear in mind, in Germany in 1933, Zionism was a fringe movement. Maybe 1 in 50 Jews supported it. You know,
this is what's often missed in our modern day discussions about this topic, is that even, I mean, you mentioned in your book as well, that it wasn't until, I believe, 1940 that in Britain, for example, the Board of Deputies of British Jews became a Zionist organization.
That's right. I mean, people often get it the wrong way around. They see the Israel lobby as the source of all problems. Now, I mean, none of us have much affection for the Zionist lobby in this country or in America. But I think we need to understand that they derived their power from the non-Jewish bourgeoisie, not the other way around. And there's a very perceptive comment in Stuart Cohen's book on British Jewry and Zionism, where he said, because the British bourgeoisie, British Jewish bourgeoisie rather, was hostile to Zionism for 20, 30 years. I mean, because they felt it undermined all their hard-won rights of Jewish emancipation and so on. Here they've been saying we're good British people, we're patriotic and all the rest of it. And here were the Zionists saying, no, we're a nation apart. We're not really British. So they reacted with horror to this. And it was only with reluctance when they saw that to be Zionist was to be patriotic, and when the non-Jewish bourgeoisie had adopted Zionism as its firm and fixed policy, because it saw a Jewish state eventually in Palestine as being useful for British interests. So, the colonization next to the Suez Canal, it was only then that the Jewish, if you like, bourgeoisie came over to Zionism, but it did it pretty late in the day. Even in 1917, I mean, they saw it as a philanthropic venture, so they gave it that kind of support, but they didn't go along with the ideology at all, or that British Jews didn't belong there. I mean, they were quite happy for Eastern European Jews to go to Palestine rather than Britain. I mean, that is true, but they weren't Zionists in any formal sense. They didn't adopt the ideology. So yes, it was very late. So, I mean,
So Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany in 1933. And at that time, as you said, Zionism is a fringe movement among German Jews and among Jews in the world. So what was their response?
I mean, Berl Katznelson, who was the deputy, really, to Ben-Gurion, editor of Davar, which is the main history paper, saw the rise of Hitler as, quote, an opportunity to build and flourish like none we have ever had or ever will have. Ben-Gurion said that the Nazis' victory would become a fertile force for Zionism.
The future first Prime Minister of Israel.
That's right, yes. And you can find that in Tom Seger's book, The Seventh Million. And Rabbi Joachim Prinz, who's one of the main leaders of the German Zionist Federation, later to become, I think, deputy president of the World Jewish Congress, said it was morally disturbing to be considered as the favourite children of the Nazi government, particularly when it dissolved the anti-Zionist youth groups and seemed in other ways to prefer the Zionists. The Nazis asked for a more Zionist behaviour.
This incredible device removes 50 times more earwax than cotton swabs and lasts a lifetime. The internet is already calling it the #1 life hack of 2020.
He has made a film, and I want to talk to him about it. Donald joins me now.
Zionist historians, they don't disagree with this at all. I mean, but of course, that's buried away in the footnotes of learned journals. For most people, they will believe that a Jewish state and the Jews are synonymous, and that's what we have to tackle.
So going back to Chaim Weizmann for a moment, you noted in your book that he emphasized that a Jewish Palestine, quote, would be a safeguard to England, in particular in respect to the Suez Canal. The intention was, quote, to form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. So this also kind of coincides with European settler colonialism and imperialist, very capitalist designs on the rest of the world, particularly Asia and the Middle East. Can you talk about how Zionism was also a project and is still a project of European imperialist force?
Yeah, I mean, the desire to see the colonization of that area went back to Napoleon, if not before. I mean, Napoleon wanted a French settlement in much the same area. And Palmerston, Disraeli, they all saw the benefits of British imperialism of a Jewish settlement. And why a Jewish settlement? Because the Bible legitimized it. And, and the imperialists marched with a gun in one hand and the Bible in another. One legitimized the other. So it made sense, the return to Palestine. It was a powerful moral force. And imperialism likes to see itself, even today, as having a moral legitimacy. Yes, it's not. We went to India to stop wives, widows being burnt on the funeral pyres. We didn't go to India to exploit it, of course, and to drain it of every last rupee. That's just cynicism beyond belief. But so same with a Jewish state in Palestine. It was fulfilling God's will. It was doing as a moral imperative. It was. So, I mean, there was been considerable dissent amongst the British bourgeoisie about the Palestine experiment. I mean, the Daily Express and the Daily Mail ranted against the cost of this and where the benefits in the House of Lords. There was strong opposition. It was large sections of the military were very unhappy with it. So if you read some of the papers, Doreen Ingram's Palestine papers is useful on that. You'll see the debate within the ruling class about the merits of having a Zionist settlement. But the ardent imperialists like Churchill and I can't remember now, but the imperialists, they came down. The political wing, if you like, of the ruling class came down strongly in favour of Zionism.
And the Labour Party, including the Labour Party.
Oh God, it was. I mean, the Labour Party was worse in so many ways. I mean, I've got that quote. I know we didn't see it by Ramsay MacDonald. Actually, that's a useful one. I read it out. I'll just search for it now. I mean, Ramsay MacDonald went to Palestine. It was in 1922, and he wrote an article which was published by Poel Zion, which is now, of course, the Jewish Labour movement. And he says, the rich plutocratic Jew, quote, who is the true economic materialist, he is the person whose views upon life make one anti-Semitic. He has no country, no kindred, whether as a sweater or a financier, he is an exploiter of everything he can squeeze. He is behind every evil that governments do, and his political authority, always exercised in the dark, is greater than that of parliamentary majorities. He detests Zionism because it revives the idealism of his race. Now, I think you'd probably agree that that would get you expelled from the Labour Party today. Yet Poel Zion.
And there it is, published by the forerunner of the Jewish Labour movement.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I think we should start to make use of that quote, because I mean, it is a very, very useful. There's a number of other quotes by the right wing of the Labour Party, which are equally anti-Semitic. But the Zionists were not bothered with that. You know, I mean, that's why, I mean, the best response to the anti-Semitism campaign would have been to say, well, Zionism has never fought anti-Semitism, so why are you concerned now? But of course, people didn't have the wit about them to realise what they were really about. But that is a problem that we face. But yes, I mean, Zionism has never had any problem with genuine anti-Semitism. I mean, I could explain to you also, I mean, you mentioned Lenny Brenner's book, and that was 40 years ago. And there's been a lot of research, of course, since that, and 2 books by Francis Nicosia, which have uncovered a lot of information from the German archives and other articles. But I wrote an article in 2014 saying where I disagreed with Lenny, the Journal of Holy Land Studies. The book it's fine as a blow-by-blow account of what the Zionists said and did, and I don't detract from it, and Lenny did a lot of very great work. But I disagreed with his analysis. He didn't even mention Rudolf Verber, who was one of the 2 Jewish escapees from Auschwitz. And without, because he'd never heard of him, as he told me later. But you can't understand the Kastner and what happened unless you understand that Kastner suppressed the Auschwitz protocols, which were the first definitive proof of the existence of Auschwitz as an extermination as opposed to a labor camp. But there were other things. I mean, he went along, in essence, with the line of the Orthodox Netter Carter, Rabbi Weissmandel. And I mean, it's fine that they support the Palestinians and they come on demonstrations, but politically, I would never, ever rely on them because their political ideology is quite reactionary. I mean, they come on Palestinian demonstrations, but you won't see an Orthodox woman with them because women stay in the home and so on. So I think it's a great mistake. I mean, he covered Weissmantel, but didn't mention that he was a member of the Judenrat in Slovakia. He didn't mention things like the letter he sent advising Chief Rabbi Freudiger of Hungary to trust Dieter Bissleni, who was, if you like, the butcher of Slovakian Jewry. He had hundreds of thousands on his hands. He put into effect a bribery scheme in Slovakia to stop the deportations, not realizing the Catholic Church had done its work for him because they were pretty outraged, the Pope, at the fact that Catholic priest was heading the Slovakian government. So there are a number of things that I disagree with Lenny politically over, and I would agree with Verba. I mean, Weissmantel had the Europa plan, whereby you could bribe the Nazis $2 million to stop the deportation out of Poland. I mean, you know, Verba described that as a harebrained scheme, and I have to say I agree with him. The Zionists, you know, Yehuda Bor, you know, laid into Verba because of this, saying, how could you attack someone so noble a character as Weissmantel? So, I mean, that is also the other thing, which Brenner didn't do. He didn't tackle the Zionist historiography, how the Zionists have rewritten the history of the Holocaust in their own favor. So, for example, I mean, it's a cardinal axiom of the Zionist movement: the Holocaust is unique to Jews. And indeed, it's anti-Semitic to claim it for anyone else. You know, so yes, the Gypsies suffered, but it wasn't a Holocaust. And there's a very good debate, which I quote from Sybil Middleton versus Yehuda Bor, where Sybil Middleton says, I mean, well, that discrimination was on the basis of your biology, and the Gypsies qualify just as much as the Jews. But of course, the Gypsies don't have a political lobby and don't have any political purchase. Same with the disabled. They were murdered because of who they were. You know, you can't change if you're disabled into able. So they were also maybe up to 700,000. We don't know the numbers. We don't know the numbers of Gypsies who were exterminated incidentally either. But then, of course, we don't really know the number of Jews. All these numbers are guesstimates at best. So, but for the Zionists, there was only one group that really suffered from the Holocaust, because it was the words of Lucy Davidovich, who was one of the main Zionist historians. It was a war against the Jews, and that is for the Zionists that's pivotal. But everything Hitler did was to exterminate the Jews. That was his sole aim, and you know, I mean, that's completely unmaterialist history of it, because I think it's quite clear that Hitler's main enemy was Bolshevism, communism. And the Jews were the biological parents of it, you know, the Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy. So, I mean, that's how the extermination must be seen. It's actually not true that Hitler was determined to exterminate every Jew. I mean, expulsion was their policy before 1939, in fact, before 1941. So, I mean, they're wrong on every single issue. And Sybil Middleton takes Yehuda Bor apart, and I quote from that debate in the book, so you can read it for yourselves.
And you write about both the suppression and the exploitation of pivotal moments in you know, the history of rebellion of Jewish communities during the Holocaust, especially the Warsaw Ghetto Fighters. How, you know, I remember reading the autobiography of Marek Edelman, of course, who was the co-founder of the Jewish Bund, and was just a remarkable fighter, and remained he was an anti-Zionist, you know, when Zionism was, you know, coming to Europe, and remained an anti-Zionist, and was very supportive of the Palestinian struggle for liberation. But you know, but that part of his political history, I mean, when he died several years ago, I believe the New York Times didn't even mention his support for Palestine. And, you know, the Zionists kept trying to claim him as this, you know, this great Jewish hero who, was the, kind of in the spirit of Israel, was,
I'm not sure they did. I mean,
they might have just like silenced him completely.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
in Israel, there was hardly any. I think Haaretz covered, but there was hardly anything. And, in Warsaw, I mean, he was seen off by the state president. He had a state funeral, a 15-gun salute. And not even the lowliest clerk at the Israeli embassy attended the funeral. I mean, he was disappeared. So, yes, I'm sure the New York Times just eliminated the support for the Palestinians. But when he addressed a letter to the Palestinian resistance and said he compared them to the Warsaw Ghetto fighters, that caused outrage in Israel. He was really persona non grata. He was a non-person. And so Israel forgot him very quickly. He was the last commander of the Warsaw Ghetto resistance. So, I mean, this shows you, but it was really worse than that, because at the time, I mean, there were Zionists who fought, not because they were Zionists, but in spite of the fact they were Zionists. And their own youth movements in Palestine instructed them to return to Palestine through what was the Aliyah Bet. And they refused. To their credit, Zivia Lebetkin, there was Klinger, I quote, and so on. They were instructed to come to Palestine. They were told it was a waste. So they've only subsequently adopted it. And the Hajj Kalinga, when she came to Palestine, I think it was in 1947, spoke at the Histadrut, to the Histadrut executive. And she condemned the Zionists, who she said made up the bulk of the Judenrat, the Jewish councils, which collaborated, and said we have to put them on trial. And she criticized very heavily, as did the other Zionist fighters, the response in Palestine. All their memoirs were altered, in some cases really forged, almost quotations. They excised large parts of it which were critical. So you have to go back to the original sources, and now Hajjka's diaries are printed. But I mean, the leader of Hashem Hatzer, Meir Yari, leader of Mapam, as it became, was bitterly critical of her. I mean, because they didn't understand that the real battle was in Palestine, it wasn't in Europe. And that was their mistake, that they believed they should stay with their own people. So, I mean, yes, I mean, Zionists did fight in the Warsaw Ghetto, there's no doubt about that. But it had nothing to do with Zionism.
There's so much in your book, Tony, that we won't have time to get into. And you cover some of the same topics that Lenny Brenner's book does, which, maybe I've written about as well, in relation to Owen Jones recently, namely the Havara Agreement, and the case of Rezo Katzner, who was a Hungarian Zionist leader who collaborated with the Nazis, essentially. And, you go through all those, and those cases, I mean, they're still controversial to some people, like Owen Jones, who, defended Rezo Katzner. But there was a lot. I mean, like I said earlier, I always learn stuff from you, and there was a lot in your book that was new to me. Yours is the only book that I know of which brings the entire story up to date, up to the modern day, in terms of Israeli collaboration with the far right, in globally, and you've got a global perspective on it. So, could you explain a bit more about your findings on Israel's links to the far right and fascist regimes more recently, in the post-war years and up to today? What the things that you found and that you've written about in your book?
Yes, indeed. I mean, my last chapter, chapter 18, is on Argentina, and I think that is a special case because that was the first neo-Nazi regime, leaving aside Paraguay, which was a special case under.
Yeah, I found this chapter. I read it today, and I found it really fascinating. This was largely new to me. So, yeah, explain that.
Well, between 1976 and 1983, a military junta took over in Argentina. Their ideology was anti-Semitic. They they clung to this Andinja plan, which is that Marx, Freud, and who else was it? Einstein formed the kind of holy or unholy trinity, and this was the Jewish conspiracy. And so they pulled in, they arrested Jews, left-wing Jews mainly, but not entirely, to find out, and they tortured them, and they died under torture, most of them.
So this was a local Argentinian military junta, which was kind of fascist, essentially fascist in character.
Yes.
This plan, this sort of global conspiracy they had, was their own kind of. Would you say it was their own kind of spin on the kind of Nazi ideas of a Jewish world conspiracy?
Yes, in essence, yes, except it revolved around Einstein, Marx, and Freud. Why? I'm not sure. I haven't researched into the origins of the Andinja plan, but they had this. And under the junta, up to 3,000 Jews, something like 12.5% of all those who disappeared, were Jewish. And the Argentinian Jewish community is less than 1% of the Argentinian population. So you would have thought, given all the fuss and the campaign about Soviet Jewry, if you remember that, let our people go and so on and so forth, that's a campaign in the 60s and 70s, you would have thought that Israel would have been to the fore in denouncing the Argentinian junta. Not a word of it. I mean, absolute radio silence. Why? Well, they were the largest arms supplier to the Argentinian junta. When Jimmy Carter cut off arms sales, Israel stepped into the breach. Israel was training these officers. They were going to Israel to receive their training. In the Falklands War, Israel supplied Argentina with emergency military equipment and so on. The Israeli embassy were refusing applications from Jews who were considered by the junta to be subversive. So, I mean, this idea that Israel will somehow be a refuge against anti-Semitism for Jews is poppycock, because, you know, if you're a socialist Jew abroad and you fall foul of, say, the Ukrainian junta under Zelensky, then you probably won't be given a very great welcome. But certainly in Buenos Aires, the Israeli embassy did not want to know. I mean, some Jews got visas anyway, but their policy was very hostile. And that was written up in a book by an Israeli correspondent for Yediat Ahronot. I think his name was Zohar off the top of my head, but it's in the book. And basically, they were the wrong sort of Jews, and so they were not welcomed. And the most famous of them was Jacobo Stimmerman, who edited a left Zionist paper, that opinion, and he was arrested and tortured. And the Israeli, when he was released, because his case attracted enormous publicity, he was held under house arrest. And the Israeli ambassador, Ram Negev, visited him and asked him to sign a piece of paper saying his treatment had been good, and he absolutely refused. He condemned the local Jewish community council, Dyer and Amir, who he accused of being collaborators in Judenrat, because they were Zionists. Because most of Argentinian Jewry then was not Zionist. I don't know what the situation is now, but Israel absolutely refused to speak out. And when Timmerman asked the director of the Israeli Foreign Ministry why, it was because the Russians were our enemy, whereas the Argentinians are part of our friendship with America. So, I mean, there you have it. When it came to it, the interests of Israel always come first. So this idea that a Jewish state will protect Jews abroad is total nonsense. But again, the Argentinian episode has also disappeared down the memory hole. So I'm trying to, if you like, this is a basic history of what happened. There's a lot more which I had to cut out, but I think the essentials are there. The Knesset refused to discuss the plight of Argentinian Jewry right throughout the period. It was simply vetoed on government orders until finally the Supreme Court said, yes, it has to be discussed. But the evidence is there. I mean, Shulamit Aloni from RATS, the Civil Rights Party, repeatedly tried to discuss it, and she was threatened physically by Zionists who said this is not to be discussed. Israeli interests come first. So that is the lesson of Zionism and the Israeli state. When it comes to it, it's not a guarantor of anything if you're Jewish either.
And Israel was arming the junta throughout all this
Yeah,
period.
absolutely. Kafir jets, it was flying. Yeah.
And it was during, was this part of that arming was during some periods when American arms were not being sent to the junta?
Yes, I mean, basically Israel had a policy that when the United States was forced by Congress under public pressure not to equip and arm some of the South American juntas, same in Guatemala, Israel always stepped into the breach.
This was a pattern, and this was a pattern throughout all those periods of dirty wars in Latin America, where it was same with the Contras in Nicaragua, and as you mentioned in the book as well, the genocides in Guatemala, which Israel was also complicit in by helping to arm the generals at the time.
Reyes Montt.
Yeah, who was later found guilty of genocide. Israel was, this relates to what you said earlier, Israel was a useful tool and still is a useful tool of global US imperialism and before that British imperialism. Another thing I found really fascinating in the Argentine chapter, which I don't think I really knew about, or maybe dimly, was the issue of the Amia Community Center, the Jewish Community Center, which was bombed in 1994. And we hear this brought up occasionally still today, that there was claims at the time and still now that Iran and Hezbollah was behind this, but that's actually been shown to not be the case.
Yes, it is pretty clear now from the police informer who turned, if you like, Queen's evidence, that the plot to bomb the centre originated inside the police itself. And they basically got into case the joint to point out the weak spots and so on. And it's a fair conclusion that they were responsible. There's no evidence that Hezbollah or Iran did it. I mean, and the Americans have basically accepted that there is no evidence. But, I mean, for Israel, their interests are in blaming Hezbollah and Iran. They're not in
I mean, this is Operation Gladio type stuff, really, isn't it? Because in a lot of something else you get into the book is in a lot of these South American military dictatorships, there was a neo-Nazi, if not an outright Nazi, ideology in place, because in a lot of cases there were Nazi war criminals who were sheltered in South America, sometimes even with the help of Israel. And so this was something. I mean, I knew that part of it, but I didn't know that. Something new I learned from your book was that the Israelis were doing this, essentially the same thing as the Americans and British when they were rescuing Nazi war criminals from Italy and West Germany after World War II, at the end of World War II. Israel actually did that in a few cases as well. And could you tell us who were Walter Rauf and Otto Solzhenitsyn, and what did they do for Israel? This is something you touch on in your book.
Well, I don't know a great deal about what they did for Israel, but I know that there were agents of Israel. Otto Solzhenitsyn apparently was a hitman for Israel. Solzhenitsyn was famous because he first of all rescued Mussolini when Mussolini was overthrown in the coup in, I think it was about September 1943. He was arrested and held wherever, and Solzhenitsyn, who was a parachutist and so on, led the rescue attempt and put Mussolini back in charge of what was called the Sailor Republic, which was really run by the Nazis, not by the Italians. And it was then that the deportation of Italian Jewry began. So, I mean, Solzhenitsyn played a key part in that. And then in Hungary, again, the anti-Semitic regime that Nazis had basically installed under Horthy in March 1944 was basically eased out of office by Horthy after the response of the West to the deportations. The deportations of Jews started in middle of May 15th, 1944, and they were stopped by Horthy on July the 7th, basically because they'd become an open secret in the West what was happening. a massive publicity given to the Auschwitz protocols, but despite Kastner's efforts were publicized, the Swiss press blew it all up in the open. And basically, Horthy just called a halt to it and said, we can't persist in this any longer. I mean, Horthy knew what was happening, but he got cold feet, as did quite a number of the Nazis' allies in Eastern Europe. Antonescu in Romania likewise got cold feet when he realized that the Germans were going to lose the war. And so that situation changed. But Scott, I mean, Horthy established regime, I think it was from about August to October, under General Latakos, which was a fairly benevolent regime as they go, and the Jews weren't persecuted and deportations were no longer taking place. And then Horthy was very stupid in many ways. He told Hitler that he was joining the Allies. So, of course, the Nazis then promptly overthrew him. And Skorzeny came in and he captured Horthy's son, also called Miklos, rolled him up in the carpet, believe it or not, and told Horthy that if he made one wrong move or disobeyed what his orders were, his son would be shot. And so he played a very key part in re-establishing a neo-Nazi, if you like, regime in Hungary from about October, I think it was the 23rd, onwards until Budapest was liberated in January 1945. There were no deportations. Auschwitz had already really shut down. It stopped exterminations in about October and November. They were actually blowing up the extermination equipment because Himmler was also getting cold feet at that time as well. But in the Neolas, the Arrow Cross, who were the fascists who'd taken power, I mean, they ran riot in Budapest and they killed up to 50,000 Jews. I mean, Budapest had 250,000 Jews in it. So, I mean, about 200,000 were saved because of the Auschwitz protocols, but 50,000 died in these savage pogroms before the Soviets liberated Budapest and the rest of Hungary. So, I mean, Skorzeny played a key part in that, but nonetheless, he was an agent of Israel, and likewise Walter Rauff. Walter Rauff had to his credit the invention of the gas truck, whereby you put people in the back of the gas van and you attach a hose to the exhaust, channel it inside, and people die quite painfully, really, of carbon monoxide poisoning. So those gas trucks were used first against the disabled in Germany, which caused an outrage. I mean, you know, people began wondering what's happened to my child. He's been taken off, declared subnormal, and then the death certificate arrives. And, you know, this happened times 70,000 or something. So eventually it was pretty much an open secret. There were these killing centers in Germany, and Hitler realized he couldn't persist with it any longer. But it was transferred to what was called the wild euthanasia to the concentration camp. So it continued, but it didn't continue in Germany. And that was the answer to those who said, well, German people knew about the extermination camps. It's not true. I mean, the main reason why they were not situated in Germany was precisely because German people shouldn't know about them. So they were situated in Poland for those reasons. But Walter Rauff, I mean, he not only invented the gas truck, which killed, I don't know, a minimum of 100,000, probably many more, on the borders of the Soviet Union, in Chelmno, which was the first extermination camp, and then in Serbia and elsewhere. He went to Tunisia and he was trying to set up, during a Nazi occupation from about October 1943, an extermination camp in Kairoun, but the Nazi occupation only lasted about 6 months, and the Italians also objected. So eventually they gave up the idea, and they said the Nazi occupation of Tunisia was short-lived, fortunately. But Rauff was a major war criminal. And for Israel to have him as its secret, its agent, I mean, it was just outrageous, but that's what happened. And they paid for his passage to Ecuador, where he started a new life. And I think he became a high officer in the Chilean secret police under Pinochet. So, yes, I mean, Israel has no hesitation saying cooperating with neo-Nazi regimes and movements. Is it any wonder? I mean, we have a Jewish Nazi party which is set to become the third largest in the Knesset now. So, you know, I mean, Israeli politics are, you know, I mean, are going around. I mean, if you establish an ethno-national state, I mean, what you do, it accords with the logic of what the Nazis did as well. I mean, that's the fate of ethno-nationalist states, which is why neo-Nazis today love Israel. Because really, what is there not to like about it? You know, as Richard Spencer says, I'm a white Zionist.
Over your decades of research and this book and your own political activism, where do you see Zionism headed now in this current state, in this context of Israel becoming more and more fascist, more of an apartheid genocidal state, and more ingrained with imperialist designs and politics around the world?
It's a difficult question because it depends on so many variables. I mean, what I don't think is possible is that the Palestinians by themselves will have the weight to overthrow Zionism in Palestine. They're unlike the South African black people. They don't have a major working class on which the whites depended. That isn't the case in Israel. I mean, South Africa was an exploitative colony primarily, an exploitative settler colony, whereas Israel really doesn't want Palestinians. It would quite happily expel them over the Jordan, given the chance if it was politically feasible. So there is a much greater strength in Israel. I mean, not only politically, but economically and socially as well. It's a very tight community. And that's why, I mean, any ideas of socialism have died. I mean, the term leftist is an abuse. It's a term of abuse in Israel today. And you can see the Zionist left, which was never much of left. I mean, it's now a fragment. It's fulfilled its role. It's irrelevant. So I don't see within Israel any change whatsoever. I think groups like the Board of Deputies will continue to whitewash what happened. The Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish News and so on will ensure that nothing true gets out. So it's up to the Palestine Solidarity Movement in Britain to make, apart from anything else, young Jews aware, like they have in America, of the reality of what is happening. Now, I think to a large extent, British people, there is a growing realization that Israel is an apartheid state. But where I think people go wrong is to believe that the British establishment will therefore be persuaded. Israel is supported because it's in the interest of British and American imperialism. So there won't be much change unless they are forced to change by a mass movement from below. And so the idea of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, that you can really mainstream the anti-Zionist or the pro-Palestinian narrative, simply doesn't accord with reality, because it's not in their interest to, which is why the most anti-Semitic papers, you know, the Mail, which campaigned vehemently with the Express to not admit Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany, you know, is the most pro-Zionist of them all. They can employ a neo-Nazi called Katie Hopkins, you know, who speaks on platforms with Holocaust deniers. At the same time, they can be avidly pro-Zionist. Being anti-Semitic and Zionist is perfectly compatible. And obviously many Jewish people don't understand that. But I think in terms of Zionism, the anti-Zionism, until the Arab people have overthrown the regimes that oppressed them, because those regimes are protected by Israel. I mean, that's why Israel was put in place, to guarantee the safety of Western oil interest. Until we see, if you like, revolution in the Arab East, then I don't think Zionism will be overthrown. I can't see any other force that can do it, certainly not within Israel. The Jewish population, the settler population, certainly isn't going to do it. Anyone who believes that is living in cloud cuckoo land. I mean, Martin Luther King said it, that those who benefit from privileges will not voluntarily give them up. It's a letter from Alabama jail. It's true now as it was then. So there are basically no reformist solutions to Zionism. You know, I mean, you can reform capitalism and introduce palliatives, if you like, but you can't do that with Zionism. It has to be overthrown. utterly destroyed. So, I mean, I say in my book that even if there'd been no Palestinians, even if the Zionist movement had colonized an empty Pacific island, I would be opposed to Zionism because it's a reactionary formation in its own right, regardless of what it's done to the indigenous Palestinians. That's true now as then, but Palestine will not be free until the Arab world is free, I'm afraid. I can't, unless America withdraws its support because the oil's run out or something like that. But even then, I somehow doubt it. But I mean, that's my scenario. But Zionism itself, well, in America, I mean, it is losing favor amongst Jewish people. I mean, it's the main supporters are, of course, fundamentalists because they are Christian imperialists. I mean, that's what really motivates them. It's a national religion, like just like you had the German Reich Church, where the Germans were the chosen people, and so likewise America and the Manifest Destiny. It's all the same. I mean, Bob Dylan wrote that every nation that goes to war has God on its side, and that's as true of America as it is of Israel. So I'm sorry, that's not very optimistic, but I can't. I can only do my best to kind of help people understand what Zionism is. Unfortunately, it's not within my power to do much more.
Well, you've done a lot, Tony.
I am but an individual.
Tell us where you can get the book, when it's coming out, and how people can stay in touch.
Right, okay, it's long overdue. I was naively optimistic it would be out last April, but not having been through this process, or having written one book before, and that was all done for me. This was basically self-published in the sense that I paid over lots of money to a publishing company to do it for me, but it's a massive book. It's nearly 200,000 words. And I had to send back proofs repeatedly, correct errors, all of that. And in the process, I rewrote some of it as well. So it will be out within the month, cross my fingers. Everything apart from the hardback cover has been completed. So it is really just now a matter of time. The proof copies, as I say, are out. And the book itself will be out. So if people want a copy of it, write to me, email me at tonygreenstein104@gmail.com. I will put that on my blog and I will let people know, but it would be very useful. If you, unfortunately, PayPal took down my account recently. They provided no reason, but I think we can guess where the pressure came from. That would have been the easiest way, but that's not to be. So if you email me, I'll provide you with the bank details. And if you transfer the money, it's almost going to be at cost price. The paperback's going to be about $12.50 and the hardback about £18. And that it'll be a bit more expensive from the publishers themselves, but I won't be making a vast fortune, I'm afraid. But I just want to get it out really, because I think the information in it needs to be known and understood. Because if people had understood Zionism's record vis-a-vis anti-Semitism, that they would have pulled them up about the Labour Party and said, well, your record today isn't very good, is it? Why are you so concerned about Jeremy Corbyn? But people don't ask simple questions like that, do they?
What was the response? I mean, presumably you approached publishers with this.
Yes, I mean, I approached Zed Press, one of whose consultants told me that the book was incendiary. Pluto Press didn't even give a response. Verso hesitated. They actually employed a couple of readers, one of whom was quite useful in terms of structure of the book, so it did help me rethink it. But at the end, they got cold feet. I mean, it's a large book. Pluto told me it was too large anyway, but I don't know. But it's easier printing left-wing academics. They're not going to cause too much of a stir. I mean, this will undoubtedly cause a stir, and they obviously didn't want to be associated with it. So I decided I had to do it myself. The Zionists were very helpful in that because I set up a crowdfunder And I did it deliberately on the Saturday because I knew they would be at synagogue and couldn't get anything out. So by the Monday or the Tuesday, it had raised about £700. But I wrote to each person saying, send me your email. This is going to be taken down. There's no way they'll let it stay up. But then I can write to you again and organise another means of payment. Well, of course, I blogged on it about the Zionists attacking free speech. So I raised about half the cost simply from a crowd from that. So in essence, the Zionists did help me unwittingly because it took them 3 days to take the blog, the crowd funds down. And we know, of course, why they did that. So that's how it is. So, but sometimes they are so predictable. They're predictably stupid as well.
All right, so Tony, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And your blog is, if people just Google Tony Greenstein blog, it's on Blogspot. And I'm sure there'll be more details there about your book in the coming days and weeks. Thank you very much, Tony Greenstein.
Thanks, Tony.
That's okay.
Thanks for watching this.
Wow. Thanks, Adele, Royal, and Keith on Facebook Live, and Eugene and Richard and Nina who hung out to the end. That was really awesome. I have to get that book and read it. It was really incredible scholarship. So, Keith, what did you think?
I got late, so I'm sorry I missed most of it. What I'm still bugged with is what is a Semite? People don't know what a Semite is. Palestinian are Semites, but they don't talk about it.
If you earlier in the program, we talked about some of the Zionists who said that the European Jews weren't Semites. And they took in Yemeni Jews to be like laborers and stuff, that the European Jews were not Semites, and therefore they were considered superior to the Jews who came from the Middle East. So that's earlier in the interview. I'm going to make a YouTube of this and post it so you can catch the whole interview. But actually, they talked about that. He brought that up in his book. And
Ashkenazis are not Semite.
yeah, that's what the Zionists actually claimed. Zionists claimed that in the beginning because they wanted to assert the superiority of the European Jews over the Jews like the Yemenis and the Jews who came from the Middle East, because they had kind of more of an Arab culture. Eugene, what did you think? Oh, you're muted. You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
I thought it was an excellent presentation, and all I can say is I'm interested in Mr. Greenstein's book.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did say that his email was Tony Greenstein 104 Gmail, but I was wondering, is there a space or an underscore between the first and last name, or is it all one?
I think it's all one. Yeah.
Great.
But also he's on the blog, so we can Google his blog to get further information. But I'm going to get the book too. So maybe, if a few of us get the book, we could do a discussion, from our perspective, because he's British. So he's looking at it more from the British and European angle. But I think as Americans, is a whole other angle that he touches on, in terms of the imperial convenience Israel is for American imperialism. But,
absolutely.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things. Nina, how about you? Nina, can you unmute yourself? Are you there?
Here I am. I came in at, of course, the last maybe 20, 30 minutes. I thought it was fascinating. I think there's a lot there that people are not aware of, and it should be put out there for discussion.
Right.
And like everybody else, I am interested in getting this book as well. I think he has some important material.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this book, we should recommend it to the Brooklyn for Peace book club. Book club, you know. And Eugene, I urge you to join Brooklyn for Peace. You may not live in Brooklyn. I think you live in Washington Heights.
Well, first of all, I am a member of Brooklyn for Peace.
Oh, you are? Oh,
Yeah.
great. Good,
And I
good.
live in Morningside Heights.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, I live in
Right.
Greenwich Village and I'm in Brooklyn for Peace. But I was born in Brooklyn. So but
Nobody's perfect.
right, exactly. Thank you. They have those book groups, you know, and I'm going to recommend this book from one of their book groups. I don't go to them regularly. You know, I've been in Jordan and I just got back and I'm finally getting over. I finally slept until 8 o'clock this morning. So I can officially announce I've finally gotten over jet lag. It took me almost 3 weeks. Yeah, let's get that book and let's share further on it because there's a whole pile of information on the misinformation that Zionism is producing. But I think we have a unique opportunity now with this. Actually, I'm happy that Netanyahu and the far right won the election.
Well, they are an embarrassment to the international community.
Because this reveals what I've been saying is going
Right.
on in Israel for years. That Israel's gone far to the right, that the religious crazies have taken over, that the settlers are out of control. So finally, and even the American government has issued a statement of concern, you know. So I'm
Well-
glad the closet, they're out of the closet now, for God's sake.
Yeah.
We'll
Well, you
see,
have, for instance, that man from Netanyahu's new coalition, Ben Gvir, who openly called for ethnic cleansing.
yes, kill
You know?
Arabs. Yeah, and he recommended, he went to some, they were doing a protest at Alaska Mosque or whatever, and he said if an Arab Palestinian throws a stone, shoot him. He told the army to
Right.
shoot him. So yeah, I mean, so they're out of the closet. We know now what Israel has really become.
Well, there is something else that it proves, that the United States doesn't respond to anything unless the problem is shoved right into their faces.
Yeah.
That they don't do anything or say anything until that point arrives.
And they're not going to do or say anything until after the elections. They
Right.
will not make a squeak about what's going on because, and I know in New York City, the Republicans are courting the Orthodox Jews.
Right.
Because Zeldin is Jewish, but he's a big supporter of settlers. This is the guy running for governor in New York, Richard. He's a big supporter of settlers. He's a big Zionist and a big Trump supporter and election denier. So the Orthodox community, the conservative Orthodox, we are backing him and voting for him. So it's good. So the Democrats, you know, Kathy Hochul and the rest of them are not going to say a squeak about Israel. And Biden is not going to say anything about Israel.
No.
The election is over because one word of criticizing Israel will be the kiss of death for any candidate running.
Right.
So, well, listen, guys, it's great to be together, and that we have several people still on Facebook Live hanging in. It was just a long session, but I think it was worth it. I learned so much, and I really appreciate your response. And we're all going to get this book and talk about it. So have a great week, and you know, keep looking at the news closely, and let's see what's going to develop. And what I think there's going to be a lot more violence in the West Bank. Actually, I have friends of mine who are going to go to Israel and stay in Jerusalem 6 days. I advise them this is not a good time to do it. The Palestinians are not going to roll over and play dead anymore. They're not with this new group, the Lions Den group. They are not going to roll over and play dead. So we pray for the safety of everybody. But I love that first video about the tour from Hebron. Richard, you missed that, and Nina, because there you see former Israeli soldiers who were penitent and against the occupation. So there are people in Israel who have a moral conscience and who want to end the occupation, make some kind of peace and reparations with Palestinians. So this, today's session, we had the good news at the beginning and the bad news.
I just want to say something about the end of his talk, where Professor Greenstein said he doesn't see Zionism as being capable of reform. That basically he is looking to the Arab countries overthrowing their authoritarian leaders and somehow facilitating some kind of change in Zionism or the end of Zionism. Now that, and the international community, as we often hope, will intercede on behalf of Palestinians. He doesn't think that's going to happen because it's not to their advantage.
Yeah, and I'm skeptical about having lived in Jordan since 2017 on and off for like almost 15 years. I don't see the overthrow of the regimes like Saudi Arabia entrenched, and the Emirates and the Gulf,
or Egypt.
I don't see Iraq is a mess. I worked with a lot of Iraqi students this summer. I taught with them and I heard about all it's a total mess. And Iran, I don't see that regime is going to go away despite all the protests.
North Syria.
Or North Syria, exactly. So I think if we have to wait for the Arabs to change their culture and politics, I think it's going to be like another 100 years.
Iran is going out.
Yeah,
sorry,
but I'm more firmly convinced in economic boycott as a very effective means. He said he made a comparison between South Africa and Palestine, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure I quite agree with him, but I think that the BDS movement and the pro-Palestinian movements that are growing, like Ireland and Holland and all over Europe, have a chance. And I think if Israel, the other thing is the gay lobby in this country is very strong. And Israel now, the far right government, is going to be anti-gay. And, this has been always like, well, Israel is pro-gay, where the Arab countries are anti-gay. Well, that's going to change with this far right government. And that's going to create a great deal of problem, both in Israel and for Jews and gays who support Israel because of the pink washing that's been going on. So I think between the young Jews and Jews who are, fed up with the abuses of Israel and if they add anti-gay to that list, which I think is a big possibility with a far right government, I think we have a chance to effectively make some change. But
one thing, Jackie, what happened to the signs on the wall? 708 kilometers of wall to right that Palestinian aside.
Yeah, I'm still trying to contact people. I've made some emails. I haven't heard back from them. But I'll let you know, Richard. I think it's a great idea that you have, and I'm still working on it. So,
okay.
All right, see you next week. Thanks, Nina, Eugene, Richard, for being here, Adele, Royal, and Keith. And I will make a video of this. And also last week, I've had a traumatic week, so I didn't make a video of last week. So I'll make a video of last week's session with Nina and this week's session and send it all to everybody this week. So good luck for during this election. Don't have a nervous breakdown. I'm probably not gonna sleep all Tuesday night. I'm getting a large bottle of wine. I'm gonna watch the election results. Richard, we're ready for a civil war in this country. We'll see what's going to happen. So hopefully the violence won't be too bad this week in this country, and I'll still be here to talk to you next week. So masalama, thanks everybody, and free Palestine. Masalama.
Beware, fascism is on the rise.
Yes, right, absolutely. Masalama.